Perfect. All right. Well, welcome back to Backwinded. If you haven't joined us yet before, my name is RJ LaValle.
And I'm Matthew McKenzie.
So, Matt, where are we today? We have this point, we've kind of been doing this chronological build up from...
Kind of rough.
Yeah, the 80 Years' War of sorts, right, and getting ourselves to North America. But I know for myself, as a lay person, there's this gap. Like the Pilgrims arrive, our floppy-hatted freakish friends arrive on the shores.
We love them so much.
We do. I mean, it's easy to poke fun, but it's also really there's a lot to take. There's a lot to glean from their story.
Well, yes, and there's a lot of bullshit to skim out of their story too.
Right, but that's
we've dealt with that in previous episodes.
And I think we'll continue to deal with that, not just with their story, but every story going forward. Right. But so here we are. There seems to be, for somebody who's not a historian, there's this crazy gap, like Pilgrims land, and then there's a revolution.
Right.
So I think, were we dealing with a little bit of that?
Well, that's a TikTok version of it.
Right. And that's what we're here for, right?
It's all about, they had TikTok back then. Now, this is one of those historical problems that the field wrestled with years ago. And it's really a function of historical memory that we tend to...
Historical memory.
Right. We tend to characterize periods in retrospect in terms that the people at the time would never use. The golden age. No one ever knows if they're in a golden age or not. That's always applied ex post
but we
facto.
are now. Just look at the Oval Office. Sorry. Sorry.
Gilded age is a different one. This is a gilded age, not a golden age.
Sorry.
But one of these problems is we have a clash of characterizations of New England, neither of which are particularly comprehensive or accurate, but they work well enough, except in how we get from point A to point B. And the first one is Puritan New England. Everyone, we learn about Puritan New England in high school and all that. Puritan New England was never exclusively Puritan, and it is not limited to New England. Then fast forward, and now we have Yankee New England and these upstart colonists along with Virginians. Again, characterized as mostly English, which is not accurate at all.
Yeah.
There were a lot of other people here at the time. But how do we get from a Puritan New England that is characterized, at least initially, by agrarian conservatism, insularity.
Okay.
Kenneth Lockridge called them a closed corporate Christian communitarian utopia.
I was really hoping that utopia was going to be a word that began with C.
I know, but it just like... basically think a 1960s love commune, but with God instead of free sex. I mean, that's one way to look at it.
Okay, yeah, I would.
Then we wind up with the Star Trek fans, and the audience will appreciate this, Ferengi New England. These global-trotting, marine-based, shipborne, hard-driving wheelers and dealers.
Okay.
Which, in many ways, represents the exact opposite of their predecessors not 2 generations earlier.
Oh, what we were just talking about, in the last episode, absolutely.
Cosmopolitan, worldly. They both shared an appreciation for, they both shared a linkage between material wealth and moral character. Perhaps the Puritans were more religious character. By the time you get to the early 18th century, we're talking about both religious but also sort of social upstandingness. But in a lot of ways, these are very different worlds, and they're separated by almost no time at all. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we go from, to use Richard Bushman's term from the 1980s, from Puritan to Yankee.
And how fascinating that one of those through lines is that wealthiness is godliness.
Yeah, that aged well.
All right, so continue.
Pick your billionaire of today's, Now, I mentioned Richard Bushman, fantastic historian,
Where did he teach?
I want to say Johns Hopkins, but
Okay.
I could be mistaken about that. But he wrote a number of books in colonial history, beginning in the 1960s, into the 70s, into the 80s, and really sort of took on these historical problems, interpretive problems.
Okay.
So he looked at, when he wrote his book, literally called From Puritan to Yankee, he looked at land holding patterns and wealth distributions versus patronage networks. We're not going to get into that today because that's kind of nerdy stuff.
Let's frame where we're going to go today.
We're going to address an issue that Bushman didn't address, and that was the role of maritime trade in New England in bringing about the end of Puritan New England and the creation of Yankee New England.
Hence, we are a maritime history podcast.
Yeah, do you really need to have your phone out right now?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's because it has a timer on it.
That means we're going to be cooler to all the kids.
Why?
Because we can walk, talk, chew gum, and look at our phone and solve complex mathematical equations all at the same time while driving a 747.
Okay, so let's reframe that. Or let's go back.
We're going to start that again.
Let's go back and restate. So what are we covering today? Because man, I know you were talking at that point, but then I just lost everything.
Yeah, I've had
holy shit.
I've had 2 cups of coffee, so
I need more.
Yeah, I'm bouncing off the walls.
Right.
No, what we're gonna do today is address, I think, one of the shortcomings in Richard Bushman's very important books, and that is he doesn't pay a lot of attention to the role of maritime commerce in all of this.
And that's the way of getting around effectively. I mean, of course, you horse and carriages,
but as we've talked about, the maritime history doesn't end with mariners at the dock. It's tendrils of connectivity.
Right.
Oh wait, where's the pomposity drawer? Jar.
Week number 2, and I've forgotten to bring it.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, right. We'll just put it there
I
next time.
have one. I have it at my house.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. It was ready to roll.
Okay. All right.
And when you see what it was, you're gonna laugh. But anyways,
so that's what we're going to address today.
what time frame are we looking at?
So we're looking at basically from about 1630 to 1730.
All right. So here we go.
So and you got to remember, this is a relatively short amount of time, and I don't think people realize how little time passed between the end of sort of the great Puritan divines of the 1670s, 80s, and 90s, and really kind of the departure from that world into the more global maritime Yankee world of the 17 teens and 20s.
It's so awesome that you're going here because, I mean, quite frankly,
Cat.
This is something that I've always wondered about.
Really?
It's
You need a hobby, mate.
I absolutely do need more hobbies than what I have, but yeah, it's always been how did Puritanism and everything that embodied the
Floppy-hatted freaks.
or the establishment of Western European presence on these shores, or not, but it's not the establishment because they've been going. But as you point, they've been here for a couple hundred years already.
At least 100, yeah. We'll get to that.
Okay. So,
all right, so it starts with expectations versus outcomes. People came to the New World expecting to do A. The New World said, you're going to have to modify that a little bit. And that's true throughout the entire colonial period. There's what European projectors expected to be able to do, and then there's the reality of life on the ground. Mm-hmm. Puritans started coming here. There's a theological difference between Pilgrims and Puritans. There are religious historians who understand these things. I don't know what they are. I'll defer to them.
We're not doing that here.
But we have Pilgrims coming to Plymouth in 1620. 10 years later, you have Puritans coming and establishing the Massachusetts Bay Colony in Boston in 1630. And this is the whole Arbella city on a hill stuff.
That's just 10 years later.
Just 10 years later. And what you see developing in both these situations is that you have this union of commerce, international maritime trade, natural resource extraction, and religious utopianism. That doesn't work out. And so when both Pilgrims and Puritans arrive, they're both expecting to be able to harvest mostly beaver pelts to ship back to England to pay their debts back to the Virginia Company, or the New England Company, excuse me. By the time they get here, most of the coastal beaver populations have been hunted out. European traders working along these shores for decades, if not close to a century, before the Pilgrims actually make a go of a full-time settlement in New England. By that time, and we talked about this in the Pilgrim episode, you've got people who are buried, Europeans who are buried here, but more importantly, they've come with trade goods to address a shortage of tributary and trade exotic goods that Native American communities need to honor their dead, honor their treaties, and that sort of thing. This is Peter Moncal's thesis. So you have basically a supply and demand meet. You know, you have Europeans showing up with stuff, wanting Native American stuff, and they trade. That goes on for decades before the Pilgrims arrive. And by the time the Pilgrims arrive, a lot of the coastal populations of exotic fur-bearing animals that are in high demand have been hunted out.
Right.
Oh shit, this isn't going according to plan. The good thing is that with the advent of the Puritan arrival in Massachusetts Bay in 1630, you open up one of many great migrations in American history. So this is the Puritan Great Migration. You have the African American Great Migration out of the South and the industrializing North. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this is where we get Motown from, et cetera, et cetera. So you have beginning of 1630s, the beginnings of what would ultimately be anywhere between 25 and 55,000 people leaving England, Puritans, to settle in New England.
Wow.
That's a lot of people, and a lot of them are coming from East Anglia.
And the population of Britain at that point is...
Oh.
All right. So
it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the impact locally here is, you have a population density of Native Americans that are much lower than what it is in Europe.
And they've already been touched by smallpox and other things.
They've been hit by smallpox, and there's just massive land pressure. That's a story for another time. It's an important story, but you have increasing tensions between Native peoples and Puritans. But more importantly, from an economic perspective, and this is where this story is focused today, these people are bringing in cash. They have liquidated everything they can that they're not bringing over. They've sold land, they've sold houses, they've sold furniture, they've sold goods, and they're bringing piles of cash with them. And they walk into Boston, they are either granted land or given land or purchased land, and they start spending money to buy the supplies, the tools, the kit that they need in order to set up a farm. And as everybody who's worked a farm before knows, it's a lot of work to work an established farm. It's even more work to establish the farm in the first place.
Right. Particularly in an area that the land is littered with rubble from
trees.
Well, not just the trees, but also the land itself. Once you get everything felled, it's like a grate, but you're talking about all the effluent from the glaciers pulling back. So.
New England's #1 export agricultural product, rocks.
Right.
Really good at growing rocks. But that economics bump carries the New England economy until 1648. And then in 1648, with the outbreak of the English Civil War, you see that flood of Puritan immigration seize up almost instantly, because now the ground zero of the Puritan movement isn't in New England to create a city upon a hill, blah, 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 quack, quack, quack. And I quote my advisor, Jeff Bolster, on that one. So Jeff, if you're watching this, thank you, I guess. But what you now see is the ground zero of the Puritan movement staying in England to try to topple a godless regime and establish a new godlier regime, blah, 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 blah. Other people can talk more about the English Civil War. From New England's perspective, that means suddenly now, how are we going to pay our bills? They don't have, New England grows rocks. No one really wants rocks. There's lots of rocks, lots of other places.
Right.
They grow cows, which they have back in Europe. They grow grain, which they have back in Europe. One thing that Puritans relied heavily upon, and Pilgrims before them, is the one thing that New England and Northwest Atlantic did have that was in something of a demand in Europe was dried fish. And fishing camps had been established along the New England shoreline in the Newfoundland for over a century at this point. They were seasonal, they weren't regular, they weren't year-round occupied, but they were there every year. And as we talked about in the Pilgrim episode, you see pilgrims actually going up to a fishing camp in Damascove Island, Maine, to get some help, to help them get through the first year. So they've got fish, not exactly a high value product, but there's a lot of it and there's a demand for it. Everything else that's here is either high bulk, low value, which isn't going to carry the carrying costs of transatlantic shipment, and or it's already grown in Europe.
Right.
And so for the same reasons that the Vikings left Newfoundland, it's just not worth it. Everything we can get here, we can get closer to home. Why bother? Pilgrim New England, Puritan New England is looking at the same problem. How do we make money? And that's the challenge. Fish is part of this story.
Okay.
But the other part of the story,
But yeah, there's a lot of sticky up bits.
some sticky uppy bits that cause some problems.
Cause problems.
Well, or opportunities. It depends on if you want to be,
A farmer or a woodworker.
Yep. One of the things that New Englanders had in spades was a variety of species of trees relatively close to the shoreline. And more importantly, a lot of areas that had the right pitch of the beach in order to be able to launch vessels straight down the waves. And that's the critical thing, is a lot of people don't recognize it's the slope of the beach that is going to dictate whether you can build a ship on those shores or not. Before the advent of, by the late 18th century and more established shipways and things like that. But early on, you had to find area, I think it's about a 7% grade. I could be wrong about that. It can't be too steep, because as the boat slides down, for a brief moment, you're going to have the 4 foot of the bow sitting on the land and the stem in the water and nothing supporting the middle, and she could break in half. If it's too shallow, she won't slide.
Right.
So you have to have the right pitch. You also have to have the right types of trees. Not all trees can be used in the same interchangeably in boat application. So you need hardwoods for framing and deadwood. You need softwoods for planking and decking. You need tall, straight trees for spars, blah, blah, blah. You need to be able to make sails and line, so you need to be able to grow hemp. And hemp was a major product being grown in New England early on. And you needed to have some source of metalworking in order to make fittings. And I think in Danvers, Massachusetts, by the 1650s, there was a bog iron foundry chugging away, making
1650.
Yeah. And so what New Englanders realized is that, well, we can do what the Dutch did and start jumping in on the carrying trade. Now, from a Pilgrim perspective, from a Puritan perspective, that really wasn't, they didn't latch into that initially. That was largely non-Puritan fishermen that were looking to take advantage of downtime in the winter. So over the winter, you can bang together a fishing schooner. A group of people with different skills get together, build one of these things over the winter, launch it in the spring, fish with it all summer, and then in the fall, take that processed fish into what would become the most important market to keep New England alive throughout the entire colonial period. And that was the expanding plantation complex in the West Indies following 1630s. Yeah.
Okay.
There is this myth in high school and even college history that New England didn't have a direct hand in the slave trade. Oh, no.
That has so come to the fore in the last,
Yeah.
my own personal expansion, or exposure to it, just having worked with Amistad, suddenly went, oh boy.
Yeah.
It was everywhere.
It was everywhere.
Although Wall Street.
Yeah.
I mean, not just New England, but
And that's
all
going
of
to
the
be
Northeast.
That's a different story for another time,
Yeah.
because that is a very important story to tell, and it's a very underappreciated chapter in New England maritime history. We need to put that out there.
Yeah.
But the growing population of people in the West Indies, growing sugar, tobacco in the Chesapeake as well, the expansion of plantation agriculture through the massive increase in the importation of enslaved Africans, especially after 1690 with the abolition of the Royal African Company, you start to see a market for food, because it didn't make sense to commit much land to growing food in the West Indies. It made more sense to grow the tropical staple export product that you could sell for big money in Europe, and then you just buy the stuff you need and bring it back again. New Englanders were able to sort of cut in on that by starting to sell their farming surplus by the 1670s and 80s, especially in the early 18th century. A lot of the farm surplus that was being generated by New England mixed husbandry farms was being exported down to the West Indies. Cheese, livestock, salted meats, especially dried cod, especially the what the fishermen called Jack and Jill bits, the stuff that wasn't high enough grade to fetch a market in Europe, half rotted, poorly cured, broken off pieces off the fish flake floor or whatever.
Jesus. Yeah.
Just chuck it into a box, you can sell it down into the West Indies for something.
Just inhumane.
All of this started,
Yeah.
ironically, with a barrel of herring.
Really?
I want to say about 1655.
Okay.
Samuel Sewall, a Puritan divine out of Boston, had a barrel of pickled river herring that he threw aboard a vessel that was making an exploratory venture down to the West Indies. Is there a market for anything we have down there? This barrel of fish spent probably a month getting down to the West Indies. Granted, it was probably, maybe it was wintertime after the hurricane season, maybe it wasn't. Oh, it gets better. This thing is bounced around in that hull for another 3 months, going from island to island to island, looking for markets.
Yeah.
And then finally, the captain sells this thing. That fish must have been
Just
putrid
nasty.
and fermented by that.
Yeah.
And he sold it as food for enslaved Africans.
Oh my God.
And that's when New Englanders realized that we could sell anything food related down to the West Indies, in addition to lumber, shingles,
Yeah.
leather goods, livestock. Connecticut,
All of the burgeoning industries that were starting to take root up here in New England.
right. Connecticut was known as the provision state, not because it grew food for local urban populations, but they provided provisions to maintain enslaved populations of human beings in the West Indies.
Wow.
And if you-
And when did it have that moniker?
colonial period.
Yeah, okay.
So beginning in the early 18th century.
Yeah.
The opening of that trade in particular, but also the export of merchantable fish, the higher grade fish, back to Europe, and we'll talk about that in a second. But these two things gave Puritan New England a lifeline. It also planted the seeds of its own destruction, because when you are selling stuff all over the world and you've got people going all over the world, even if they are not of your farming community, those people are going to come back talking about those experiences.
Sure.
And so what you see developing in New England is a coastal community, a coastal population of better traveled people, basically acting as the sailors, the merchants, the carriers of a rural farming community that's just inland from those, by the late 17th and early 18th centuries. And these two populations are starting to chafe against each other. There is a thesis about the Salem witchcraft trials that rests upon this division between the port of Salem, Massachusetts, cosmopolitan, worldly, connected to the Atlantic world. People are coming and going all the time, different ideas, different products. Mm-hmm. That's one hand. Just up the road, you have the town of Salem, which is conservative, holding on, with white knuckles to its Puritan origins, and the people who are caught in the middle are women who happen to, for some reason or another, step out of the patriarchal, conservative, rural structures that they were supposed to be confined by, to be able to embrace the commercial opportunities that even some women are allowed access to by being connected to the port.
I've also heard that there's
a lot of theses.
A lot of theses.
Yeah.
There's the one around women actually having been the healers of the time.
Yep.
And
there's a whole
being
bunch
demonized in that regard.
Yep.
When the men wanted to take back control.
Yep.
Over that.
Midwifery is a cause of it. Wheat rust is a cause for it.
Yeah.
I find the monocausal explanations I find to be.
You had mentioned that once before, like when we were
they're
talking
not-
about
they just-
something.
It's more complicated than that. Not
but-
everybody
but-
had wheat rust.
But isn't that the human way though? We all want to find that panacea. We all want to find that
Well, it allows
Occam's
us-
razor. We want to find the single
Right.
single thing, the binary yes or no.
Right.
but
it allows us to simplify a very complex question. I think the commercialization thesis actually is most compelling.
I've been trying to keep it zipped, and let's keep pushing
There's
forward, and then we'll
there's
come back.
the story.
That's the story.
Pretty much. There's more. Actually, there's a lot more, but we'll put that in a can for the time being, because I can see you're sitting there going, "Oh my!" Well, you're taking notes. You're just like,
this is a good thing, right?
Absolutely.
We're figuring our process out, right? All right. So let's take a break.
Okay.
And then we'll come back and we'll actually start unpacking all this.
Or fighting. Verbally sparring.
Unpacking.
Sure, call it that if you want.
All right, see you on the break.
We're back.
There we go.
Yeah. All right, so you're going to rip into me hammer and tong.
No ripping in. It's just, okay, so.
Fine, be boring.
So right out of the gate, I wanted to go back all the way back to 1630, the establishment of Boston. Mm-hmm. Would that have been done, because back then Boston was not what it is today.
The Shawmut Peninsula, basically.
Right. It was this crazy little neck of land going out to this kind of bulbous end, but it was also tucked deep inside a harbor. Like it's not just right there. So are we talking about 1630, Boston being established under the same auspices as what we knew Jamestown and those other outposts?
I think so. And you can look at Portsmouth, New Hampshire as well, a similar situation, and Falmouth/Portland, Maine later. One, there's an advantage to getting away from
the weather,
ocean storms.
Right.
But there's also like, the biggest players in the world at the time are basically Spain and France.
Yeah.
And the English happen to be at war with all of them all the time in perpetuity during this time period.
And what's really fascinating about as you're laying out the tableau.
Oh, God. We're both on the hook for pomposity. We both owe the jar.
So as we're laying that out, or as you were laying that out, the history, we become so terrestrially minded because it's probably because that's how it's written most of the time.
Yes.
But where I'm going with that is, but without those voyages, this wasn't happening.
No, not at all. None of it.
And every single one of those voyages had to have been a harrowing tale in and of itself. I mean, yes, there was already the back and forth, but you've made this point before, that even today, going to sea has inherent risks.
Sure. But I think we tend to, again, I'm going way back to my graduate school reading. So a lot of this literature is dated, but I don't think outdated. Cressy wrote this wonderful book in the 1980s, early 90s called Coming Over. And he looked at the routine travel between late Puritan New England and Old England.
Yeah.
And that this was not something that was done once and never repeated. That there were a significant number of people who were actively crossing the Atlantic on a regular basis, albeit not frequently.
Yeah.
And these are not 747 commuters.
Right.
To manage affairs on both sides of the pond. So transatlantic commerce is getting more routinized. That said, yes,
it's not the routine that I'm wanting to try to unravel a little more. It's, I guess, I'm trying to think of it in terms of a more modern.
Why do we need a modern equivalent?
Well, at least somewhat modern. Think of train travel, right? If somebody was going to travel across country.
But the point is, you're trying to make this relatable for the audience, and I get that. But I think sometimes there's some stuff about the past we just can't relate to.
Yeah.
And I think the other issue that you're looking at is the maritime dimension of all of this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You are starting to see a more routine, but not quite routine, sailing of vessels from Europe to both the New World and the Old World.
I guess maybe I'm trying to shift the lens in a really dramatic fashion, where you've laid out our historiography, right?
Right.
And one conversation in something that we've recorded once, but we're going to re-record again and present later, the story of Joseph Ingraham.
Yeah.
In the Pacific Northwest, you had this just really wonderful story of how history is told, of how we're looking at it from the shore, all these boats coming in, right? What about being that person on the boat coming from this, going from this place to this place to this place?
So there's a wonderful historian up at UMaine named Hornsby, who wrote a book a few years ago called British Atlantic American Frontier. And in that phrase, I think he captures beautifully a different perspective about North America that would emerge through the American Revolution. His argument is that from a British perspective, North America was the frontier of a maritime empire. So basically, our boats get us to the shore and we go a little bit further inland, and that's as far as we want to go. Over the course of the 18th century, you see developing on North American shores a desire to put the Atlantic behind to some degree, amongst some people, to put their backs to the Atlantic and look west across the continent. It was never either completely one or the other. There was always a mixture. But there was he makes the argument that this is an important way to understand the difference in perspectives. And I think there's something to that.
And except for the most salty of mariners, most people, once they get to shore, are happy enough to get off that boat.
Well, we're going to get to the young men in the sea aspect of this later, because that's an important distinction. But you're thinking, so we terrestrialized this Pilgrim story because we're now interested in, we've got the English on the beach, now we're going to gallop towards manifest destiny. Hooray! Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, revolution along the way, we're going to go there. And
yes,
for a lot of people, that was, that would wind up becoming a description of what happened.
Yeah.
There was never an anticipation or expectation.
Right.
A lot of people, however, the population of the United States remained intensely coastal until the late 19th century.
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so for most people, it was an American Atlantic,
but you're
with Europe as a frontier.
But you're either coastal, or you're farmer.
Yeah.
Right.
And
what I found, you brought up the issue of topography. Wow. I mean, if you've traveled around this country, you suddenly realize how special and unique New England is in certain regions of the Chesapeake.
Yeah. Well, there's this whole concept of the fall line, and we're going to do an episode on the Chesapeake maritime history in the future.
Right.
But the role of the extent of ocean-borne navigation played a really important political role leading up to Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, because the lands below the fall line, so that first set of waterfalls where fresh water meets the Chesapeake estuary.
Okay.
You can get barges up to that point, load your cargo on them, and get them down to ocean-going vessels, or bring ocean-going vessels up to literally your backyard in many instances. But if you have to haul your tobacco product over somebody else's land, especially the people that you had worked for as an indentured servant, they're not going to let you do that for free. And so it becomes a spatial control issue. But we're going to talk about that another time. I think
to just a real quick aside, but I feel like this is important to note. What is it about those geographic regions? Is it simply because of how the colonies developed, or was it topographical? Was it agricultural? Was it commercial? Of New England being New England, and at what point does here the original Puritan Pilgrim settlers were supposed to originally be in North Jersey, the northern edge of Virginia? Was that considered the northernmost reaches of the Chesapeake influence, or where would that demarcation line have fallen back in the day? The Delaware River, or
I don't know if they even had it. Again, we're talking about people in the future trying to
overlay,
understand the past in some level. I think
Okay.
it's easy to presume that the Chesapeake I mean, it's very clear that if you were to sail from New England down to the Chesapeake, you're going to see two very different societies.
Right.
The presence of plantation enslavement of African and African Americans being the biggest, most visible version of that.
Right.
Different churches, different people immigrating into, immigrants from England, from different parts of England.
Okay.
I think there's something.
That's a good stretch.
That's a good stretch. So you have these things are being mixed up as they go along. These things were coming into existence.
And getting back to the one point of view you had, that the truly coastal inhabitants, these people are not necessarily migratory, but they're touching those influences on a really regular basis.
So
there's a lot of intermingling.
There's a lot of intermingling. Call it exposure first.
Okay.
And that may lead to intermingling, may not. But you see, like, as New England becomes more maritime in order to save its economic bacon. And again, this was not
Was it to save the bacon, or was it to create the bacon?
Either way, the whole point is that they needed to do something to pay the bills, and they couldn't count on immigrants anymore on doing that. So they had to figure out, we'll do what the Dutch did and become the carrying trade.
And it was part of that not being able to count on immigrants because of
the English Civil War. Right.
Okay.
So after
that shut down not just the transport of goods, but also of people.
Well, more importantly, it shut down the transport of people and the cash that they had brought with
Back
them
to your
to
initial
establish.
point of bringing all that cash in to buy goods in order to create farms, in order to establish oneself.
But after 50 years, or even sooner than that, by 1676, you were starting to see a serious problem in how Puritan New England terrestrially was organized. They had this halfway covenant where basically you're not good enough to be a full member of the church, but we need you to work for us and pay taxes. So we'll let you halfway in the front door. Hey,
I mean, that's OG. I mean, that's going back to 1620. That's right out of the gate.
If you're an old geezer and you want to make sure that you still profit off of young people, but you don't want them to share in that, this is the exact way to do it. We'll give you half of the value. There's a lot of discussion about this. I'm oversimplifying the halfway covenant. But it's a symbol of that the system that was established in 1620 and 1630 was breaking down and not able to, the theological, church-based social structure wasn't able to really accommodate to the economic challenges of the time. And seafaring became increasingly the solution to that. However, you also now have an economic activity that is cutting against the insularity of Puritan New England. And this is why you see developing along the coasts a more cosmopolitan community. I'm not going to call it cosmopolitan, but more cosmopolitan. And in the interior, a more insular agrarian community.
Given that's a lot of upheaval. That's a lot of conflict. That's a lot of, and it's amazing that there wasn't more outward conflict, or maybe is the fact that there weren't more rebellions or physical conflicts due to the topography, due to that there was space, that there was peace.
There was always the French. Whenever there was tension within New England, they would just went up and tried to beat up on the French. 1688, 1715, there's a whole litany of New England.
I need to take out some
I'm mad, let's go find a Frenchman. And the French were doing the same thing, or were still Native Americans. I mean, you got to remember that. You have King Philip's War in 1675.
Okay.
And that's another thing, is that we're not problematizing the spread of Puritan New England inland. Before Metacom's defeat in 1677, there was a viable, politically powerful, significant Native American presence hemming in English settlement along the coastlines. English are getting further inland than before the Pequot massacre, to be sure. They're getting in there. They're taking land and pushing Native Americans out, hence King Philip's War to begin with. But they're not able to just walk through wherever they want.
So there's this pressure inward and a pressure outward.
Exactly.
So it's spilling out in both directions.
And I just had a brilliant thought. if I do say so myself.
Yes.
And I can't remember what it was.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's on me.
Nope, no. I got caught up in my own genius. I can't even finish that sentence. It's so full of shit.
Awesome. Caught up in my own genius.
It generates its own gravity.
Yes.
Quote Jeremy
It's amazing
Clarkson.
I didn't get pulled in.
All right, so this you're starting to create a bifurcation of experience in a lot of ways, and I don't want to oversimplify that. I'm not going to say that there was.
Oh, we are doing such incredible broad strokes.
Yeah, this is like
it's really difficult,
right.
and I think everyone needs to know that.
Yeah,
everything we're doing here are such
Right.
broad strokes, is such oversimplification, and we're touching on areas in which you can find experts who have drilled so deeply down
Right.
into these things, and,
Yeah,
and it's we're hoping to just expose, right, where this is, and ideally, well, I mean, future episodes we will be bringing in those experts. We can go deep into these
there
things.
is a whole genre of New England town studies that came out in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
Where historians were running through every town archive in New England, digging up the dirt, the gossip,
The tea, as the kids say today.
the tea. Oh, is that what they say?
Yeah,
Oh, that's actually remarkably literary.
spilling the tea.
Spilling the tea
Yeah.
of every little town in New England and publishing. It got to a point where you just said like a New England town. Like Kenneth Lockridge's book is called A New England Town, and it's
Okay.
supposed to be this typical town. And then everyone said, no. He was focused on Danvers. Like, these people look at Salem, these people look at Andover, these people look at
Yeah,
Danbury.
there's no such thing as the archetypal town.
So we've got this situation where you have a coastal New England that is embracing this trade with the West Indies. It's embracing a trade with the Old World. It is figuring out how to make lemonade out of lemons, basically, by cutting down trees, drawing upon a skill set that came over with the farmers from East Anglia and other parts of England that came over. People who knew how to bang houses together, people who knew how to make blacksmith, things like that.
You have an entire economy that's building
Well,
up.
you have a diversifying economy.
Okay.
And what that means is a lot of the skills needed to build and launch a boat are readily transferable into the larger economy. If you can build a boat, you can build a house. Macroeconomically, you now have a more diversified New England economy compared to these staple export economies of the Chesapeake with tobacco, with sugar coming out of the West Indies, and other tropical staples that are more often than not grown by enslaved populations of people in the West Indies and the Chesapeake. So in New England, you have a situation where you don't have that necessarily. You do have, and this will be another episode, a strong New England role in the transshipment of enslaved Africans from the Old World to the New World.
I mean, this diverse economy that you're painting of in New England, it's like it was jumping into the role of managing or supporting the slave trade from
directly profiting
from the very beginning.
There may not have been
1650s. You're saying?
I don't know when New England got into the transshipment.
I'm not talking about the transshipment, but the selling of the herring.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, arguably, you
right
could
out of the gate. It's like, oh yeah, we'll help you out.
You couldn't. The West Indies may not have survived as they did without New Englanders' willingness to sell provisions and building materials to sustain a human population, small number of it for free. Most people are enslaved, far beyond the region's carrying capacity.
Yeah.
In fact, the South Carolina colonies,
and you're saying that, I mean, the nascency of that began 1655.
Yeah, you see the spread of sugar production following the Dutch defeat out of Brazil in the 1630s, and that technology, that understanding, the enslaved people who knew how to run the sugar production machinery, that spreads throughout British West Indies, especially the Lesser Antilles in the 1630s and 40s.
Wow.
And what feeds the population of people who are forced to grow this stuff, a lot of it is New England grown.
And if that's not being shipped via boats, that's not happening,
It's not happening.
right?
So you've got that. Obviously, you have return cargoes of things like molasses and fruit.
Yeah, because
and that
anybody
sort of-
running a boat, they don't want it to ever run empty.
Exactly. You're not
Right.
making any money off of that.
Yeah.
You also see developing and I don't want to talk about triangle trades because that's an oversimplification. It is far more complicated
Sure.
than that. You have multiple trade routes, and there's not necessarily even established. You could set out on one and wind up following another. There's boxes, triangles, trapezoids, dodecahedrons. I mean, it's not just a triangle.
You just wanted to say that word.
I did.
It's a good word.
Hey, I'm just letting my D&D roots.
Oh, Jesus. You're pandering now.
One of the best days I've ever had in my life as an
You're
adult.
pandering to potential audiences, starting with Star Trek and now going to D&D.
Well, but I'm not a Star Trek. I'm a Star Wars person. I mean, if there is a division of those two communities, I'm totally Star Wars side of that. Up until about 10 years ago, then things starting to get a little wacky.
Okay.
No, but one of the best days of my life as a parent was running a D&D campaign for 3 12-year-olds. So much fun. So much fun. Lord of the Rings meets the Three Musketeers, 16th century Europe. I didn't have to invent a thing. I just pulled maps off the internet, pictures off the internet. It was genius, absolute genius, if I do say so myself. The kids had a ball. I had a ball. It was the most fun I've ever had in my life. Anyway, where the fuck were we?
We are coming to the conclusion of this little.
There's so much more to talk about.
There's so much more, and I think what we need to do is actually come close to wrapping this up somehow.
I think I can do that in 3 sentences.
I'm having such a hard time not being just mind blown by this beginning or this support of the growing sugar plantations in the West Indies, but for the efforts of the New Englanders.
I mean, they weren't the only ones involved.
Of course
in it.
not. There was money to be made and people saw it.
But arguably, they would not have evolved the way they looked.
Yeah.
Had the New Englanders not been involved. In fact, New Englanders, they were gouging the living hell out of the plantation owners for their provisions. This was not a benevolent trade.
Well, of course not. I mean,
And
you're talking about selling putrid fish.
Right, and everything else they could export. It got so egregious that a group of plantation owners in Barbados sent a select group of white slave drivers and overseers and enslaved Afro-West Indians to this area called the Carolinas to set up a food colony to undercut New England prices. This is where the term cowboy comes from. What these plantation owners realize is that a lot of the people that they had enslaved on their plantations had been raising cattle in Africa before they were captured. And they said, oh, wait, let's set up our own stockyards in the Carolinas and we don't have to buy from these New Englanders anymore.
Wow. Okay. So
and then that becomes tobacco and rice and all that.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, Carolina is a food colony for another colony because New Englanders are gouging the prices. I think there's a couple important takeaways here.
Okay.
We're talking about from Puritan to Yankee.
Yeah.
And it's clearly this economic desperation of the last third of the 17th century that drives coastal New England out into the world, following models established by the Dutch. We're going to build ships because we have the talent, we have the raw materials, we have the geographic and geological resources needed to do this. And as a value-added activity, we are actually reaping profits from our invested sweat as well as our invested capital.
Good.
So I think that's a really important thing to recognize, is that unlike the extractive economies of plantation production, where you just are planting, harvesting, and exporting and then importing, these things are leading to economic complexification. I think what's really important too to recognize is that a lot of what this maritime industry relies upon, far more than agricultural economy at the time, and we didn't really talk much about the role of specie, cash, played.
No, we didn't. I mean, hardly at all.
a lot of these maritime services are conducted as a cash exchange basis. You have to put cash down to insure. You get cash when you sell your boat. You get cash when you are selling your fish to a plantation owner in the West Indies, because they don't have, well, they probably traded in that case, but a lot of these maritime activities involve the exchange of currency, and that changes the game, because now you see.
So then, how did the hiccup of the British Civil War? How did
English Civil War.
English Civil War.
It took time for that to come into being. This is, fast forward by 1725, you start to see really an established insurance system. You start to see bills of exchange, trading houses are established that can issue cash, or at least sufficient credit.
But how did the English Civil War disrupt that cash flow?
That cash flow emerged in response to the disruption of the influx of cash from the Great Migration, for all these English immigrants coming into the New World.
Okay.
So, simple version, Great Migration, English immigrants are coming into the New World until 1648. Then they're not coming anymore.
Yeah.
How are we going to get cash? We're going to go to sea.
Okay.
And what's happening is, in a rather counterintuitive way, New England is becoming a center of capital accumulation in the New World, unlike these far more valuable colonies in the West Indies and the Chesapeake. If you look at, there's a 1770s accounting.
By happenstance, or
because of the nature of maritime trade. If you're offering freightage services, that's paid for in cash.
Yeah.
If you're offering insurance services, that's paid for in cash. If you are building a boat, filling it with cargo, then selling everything back in the old world, you can come home with cash. Or you can turn it into an export commodity.
Exactly.
You also have this burgeoning trade. I mean, we've been talking about the West Indies a lot, but you also have a burgeoning trade between colonial New England and Northwest Atlantic fishing communities and southwestern Europe. John Hancock's father, Thomas Hancock, was a wine merchant for a reason. He gathered salt cod cargoes, shipped them to Portugal in exchange for wine, and brought that back to the New World. And Newfoundlanders were doing that. Everybody's doing it.
And would this have been done on an individualized basis, or would there have been small corporations that were starting to develop that?
You had small trading houses developing, so you could get increasingly large
economies
piles
of scale.
Right.
There would trading house be dealing with half a dozen different vessels,
Right.
or
look at Moses Brown.
Okay.
The founder of Brown University, but also one of the first investors in Slater's Mill in 1790. The reason why he had cash to invest, because again, industrialization also relied upon cash. You needed to pay people in wages. That was the big gamble of industrialization in New England. He got that cash through maritime activities, including involvement in the slave trade. If I recall the Brown University report on the university's involvement in the slave trade correctly, I'll double check that. The Thomas Albion, or Robert G. Albion, coined a wonderful phrase. In New England, by the early industrial period, the center of economic activity shifted from the waterfront to the waterfall. How it got to the waterfront is the story we've been talking about today.
right.
And it was this desperate embrace of high-risk maritime trading that allowed New Englanders to actually hold their own in an Atlantic world that was defined really by the hauling of high-value, relatively speaking, low-bulk cargoes of tropical produce produced by increasing numbers of enslaved Africans and their descendants in the New World. And New England didn't have a way to cut into that except as the carriers of it, exactly the way the Dutch did 100 years before with the European and the Baltic trades.
Wow. You said you have three sentences to wrap it up, or was that what we just did?
No, that was more than 3 sentences. 3 sentences. Okay, sentence 1. To go from Puritan to Yankee, New Englanders had to go maritime.
Okay.
In going maritime, the effects of the exposure derived from maritime commerce was unevenly felt, with coastal communities feeling it more than inland communities. By the 1730s, this is the third sentence, by the 1730s, the Puritan hegemony that rested upon insularity had effectively all but broken down in the face of an increasing engagement with an transatlantic world.
Okay.
Period. 3 sentences, done. They weren't pretty.
No.
But they were grammatically correct.
And effective.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the job.
Efficient, effective,
That's the job.
communicative.
Yeah.
Which I think brings us to a great place where we're now moving into the early colonial period, right? Where we can start addressing some of these great things. What still TBD. However, the land
What? Still TBD, however.
the landscape in which we're
Seascape.
thank you in which we're now navigating rich with possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, and I see what's happening is that we're sort of taking a broad brush, establishing a series of tableau, as you use the term.
Yeah, not probably.
I know it makes a little bile come up in my mouth when I hear that word as well.
I just don't know if it's the most appropriate word at that point. But anyways,
Sort of larger visions
Okay.
within which we now can zero in on it.
yeah. My name is RJ LaValle.
And I'm Matthew McKenzie. Thanks for joining us at Backwindow.